office on Monday. So during the wide-ranging conversation, the president reiterated his fears about the future of democracy in America. Let's listen.
I really am concerned about how fragile democracy is. That sounds corny, but I mean, I really am concerned because you've heard me say it 100 times. I really think we're at an inflection point in history here. We're unrelated to any particular leader. Things are going to change drastically. So I guess what I'm worried about is that the thing that keeps it on track are the guardrails. There's a Supreme Court that's independent, but accountable. There's a Congress that you speak your mind, but you're held accountable to basic standards. There's a presidency that says you have really limited powers. I mean, you're the top dog, but you're not. You can't dictate everything. And I don't know. We just seem to be chipping away at all those elements. Look, if the decision is made that the multi-billionaires, the super wealthy, the wealthiest people in the world, begin to control all the apparatuses from the media to the economy, and who do I get to fight back for me? Who do I get to? I mean, look, I think everybody deserves just a shot. Not a guarantee, just a shot. How the hell can you make it in society today if you don't have access to an education? You don't have access to adequate health care. You don't have access to the opportunity to have a job that you can handle, where you can make ends meet.
Lawrence, in his farewell speech to America, Joe Biden warned about the increasing power of billionaires, an oligarchy rising to control America's government, and of course the industrial tech sector. Did you find those themes running throughout his interview with you as well?
Yeah, that's where he wanted to begin. He definitely, because I gave him a pretty wide open beginning there, and that's what he chose. That's what he went for. He also made some news, or certainly clarifications. He said, I asked him if he had spoken to the president-elect this week or last week as the ceasefire deal was coming to a close. He said no. The only time he'd talked to him was on that visit to the Oval Office that we all saw. And he said that was just a brief part of that discussion, talking about the ceasefire negotiations. I asked him, when is the first time he said the words ceasefire to Benjamin Netanyahu? And it was much earlier than publicly known, right at the edge of Israel's major escalation in Gaza. And he, the challenge, Joe, in those interviews, as you know, a presidential interview, they schedule it for 20 minutes. And I knew he would go longer than 20 minutes talking to me. I didn't know how much longer, 25, 30, I don't know. We ended up, I think, doing 48, but that was every second of it. You are working with the knowledge that this could be the last question. So you're just sitting there throwing away questions the whole time. You just say, I spent days writing questions, things that we didn't get to, subjects that we didn't get to, and you just have to call an audible and constantly drop them. After the interview, there was actually had an interesting time in the Oval Office. We were walking around the Oval Office a bit. He was showing me photographs and different things that meant something to him. And we caught that. We have video of that. We're going to show that on Monday. The president talking about a photograph of his mother on election night 2008, where she's holding Barack Obama's hand and her son's hand, just as they're going out on the stage there to give their victory appearance. And the story about how his mother was the final voice convincing him to accept Barack Obama's offer of the vice presidency. And Joe, there's a story you're going to love that he told about being in the Oval Office with Ronald Reagan. Because I asked him, do you remember the first time you were in this room? And he said, there's so many times, and he went back to a great story about being in there with Ronald Reagan when he had just defeated a Reagan choice for Supreme Court. And Reagan's reaction to that was to ask him to come up to the Oval Office to talk about, okay, who could get through the committee, which is the way to do it. That's right. That's what you're going to have to do. And it's a really entertaining story about how that went. And so that's all for Monday. And it's just, it's just you're walking around someone's office with him and he's telling you what matters to him in this room. It's very personal. There's no news in it at all.
Yeah, he and Reagan, two Irish politicians, having good stories. Who would have ever seen that? So, Lawrence, you talked about Joe Biden's mother holding Barack Obama's hand were she still alive. I'm not so sure that would still be happening. NBC News, a pretty stunning story talking about how angry and embittered Joe Biden is toward Barack Obama, toward Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris. You go down the line. It seems that he's isolated and embittered against people who've been some of his closest allies as he leaves office. James Carville calls it a tragic ending to a successful presidency. Did you see any of that, or do you have any insights on that?
No, and there was actually an indication, an opposite kind of indication on that, because I asked him about Netanyahu, about the delay in coming to an agreement. The agreement that they've come to is essentially the same proposal that Joe Biden's had out there, since the spring. And there's an obvious issue there where I asked him, did he have reason to believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu delayed an agreement here because he knew it would hurt Joe Biden and Kamala Harris politically, and it would help Donald Trump, and the president said he absolutely did not think that. There was an opportunity there for him to go in that direction that you're talking about, and he if you watch it, he absolutely did not, and kept saying, you have to understand the difficult position Netanyahu's in politically in his country, and I understand that, and so that's the only thing that comes close to what you were just talking about, and you certainly, from the person in the room, you don't get any sense of any of that, any negative feelings at all. In the time that I spent with him.
Mara.
Yeah, Lawrence, did you get any sense of political regret from the president? Any kind of new understanding of self-awareness that could give the Democrats some cues about what to do as the opposition party? Some kind of sense that he may have done things differently if he had the chance now, and what that might look like?
Well, two things about that. The final question on my index card that I didn't get to was regrets ? And so sorry, we don't have that in there. But interesting component of what you just said is after the president gave his farewell address, where he was laying out a different approach than he did, certainly as a candidate, certainly as president. Things like, term limits for Supreme Court justices and ethics code for Supreme Court justices and that stuff about the oligarchy. A Democratic senator said to me, if that had been the campaign, we would have won. And so there are Democrats looking at that farewell address saying we see something there that is for us to go forward with.
And Rev, I mean, he did say that I think Lawrence and the president talked about not necessarily a regret, but maybe he would have spent more time on the politics of the economic policy versus the economic policy itself only. The example of not signing the checks that went to American citizens.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I think that one of the things that comes to mind when you think of Joe Biden is that he was very much more into transformative kind of politics and transactional.
Right.
And so I remember, and it came to mind when Lawrence was talking about him dealing with term limits and ethics for Supreme Court justices. He had us file on Air Force One to Lyndon Johnson Library just a couple of months ago, where he said this publicly, but nobody was rallying around that. It was a speech, everybody was glad, and that was in and out. And I think part of the frustration of Joe Biden in my conversations with him is that he wanted to transform a lot of things, and rather than transact, so it never got to the politics of the day, of which he might have been a victim of, because he got a lot more done than he got credit for.
Oh, 100%.
So yeah, Lawrence, let's talk about, this is not, we've had a lot of Jimmy Carter, something we've been thinking about in the last couple of weeks, obviously. When he left the White House, he had decades where he made a real difference in his post-presidency. Barack Obama left the White House as a young man. Joe Biden is 82 years old. This is not just a goodbye to the presidency. It's in many ways goodbye to his life in public service. A remarkable 50 years. Talk about, like, as he thought back on his career in total, his reflections on the America that he's leaving, what he's worried about going forward.
You know, he is an optimist, and this is a common condition I found, somewhat to my surprise, when I was working in the Senate, which was during the Biden era in the Senate. I remember one day, the great Senator Bill Bradley from New Jersey was in the back room of the Senate Finance Committee, where I was staff director, and he was giving an interview to a newspaper about basically the Clinton healthcare bill and how it's kind of a struggle, and so the part that I overheard as I was going back out to the hearing was Bill had painted a picture where the reporter inevitably kind of said, "Well, it kind of sounds pretty hopeless" or something, and I heard Senator Bradley say, "Well, I'm an optimist," and he went on from there. And I realized, oh, that's the difference between me and every member of this committee. I am not an optimist. It's one reason why I'm not in your field, is I'm much too cynical or I think realistic about things. And so I've grown accustomed to that condition that I do not share, that people like Joe Biden, Bill Bradley, and people who grew up in an earlier America than I did and grew up with aspirations that I certainly never had, to be in these kinds of positions. And they are the kind of, that kind of optimism is absolutely necessary in this work. As Joe Biden said, quoting George Mitchell the other day, diplomacy is 700 days of failure and 1 day of success. I mean, that's a special kind of person who can take the 700 days of failure, hope for the 1 day of success, knowing they might not get the 1 day of success, and every one of those days say to you, and mean it, I'm an optimist. Joe Biden's an optimist.
And that's how things get done, something we tried to say here a few days ago. It's a game of inches. It's not 3 yards and a pile of dust. It's a game of inches, politics, and it's extraordinarily difficult at times, but you have to be an
Painful
optimist.
at times. Yep.
Or you'd give up. I'd love for you to ask Lawrence a question, but before you do, let's talk about Joe Biden's continued concern about the rise of oligarchs, the rise